English translation 466th contact. Saturday, 21st June 2008, 14:21 hours.
There you are, old man. But be welcome, Ta, and I also offer you my greeting.
My greetings also to you, Edward, dear friend. The old man is really something, but not only for me, but also for you.
Yes, we are actually only older men when we take a closer look. For my part, I do not feel as old as I am in years, more like I am still young, if I disregard my battered health.
I also still feel young, but that comes from the attitude and overall thoughts and feelings about life. It only depends on how everything is viewed and understood. If a human being has tiresome thoughts and feelings about life and his health and all the things that life brings with it, then he also suffers from old age as well as from life, and feels old. But if a person makes progressive and evolutionary thoughts and feelings about life and all things, then he remains strong, in good spirits, and feels young.
When I think of the grumps who make life hell for themselves, feel older than old, and possibly kill themselves, I get kind of sick. Look here. I just wrote an article about the idlers of life and the pensioners, many of whom commit suicide because they cannot start life or feel old and useless. But this is also true of young and medieval humans, and of those in pre-retirement age. Do you want to read what I have written?
Of course.
There you go. I finished it last night, but I put it in the computer and did not print it out yet.
Kita reading.
Without work or other valuable activity, humans rot.
Idleness not only contributes to the rotting of humans, but in old age or retirement after retirement, it also irrevocably contributes to old age. Basically, inactivity, idleness, aversion to work, but also retirement in any way is a very bad idea, because inactivity makes people mentally, consciously, and physically ill and drives them out of useful social functions. Humans, women, and men, young and old, who indulge in idleness in life, or who retire and live in a way of doing nothing when they retire, usually get into a serious identity crisis. Idlers during life very often fall into alcohol or drug addiction and fall into antisocial excesses, while idle people in retirement feel useless. And very many of the idlers in life, as well as many humans in retirement, lose the joy of life and commit suicide. And especially among pensioners, the suicide rate is very high and surpasses all other age groups. It is a fact that for all idlers in life, men, women, young people of all ages, as well as for pensioners and people suffering from illnesses of all kinds, new role models are of necessity, through which an affirmation of life permeates them, which can be considered mainly through reasonable activity and appropriate tasks. Humans who are idlers in life or who, after retirement, live in such a way that they only do nothing, wrongly consider life and old age as a great struggle and a massacre. This, however, has nothing to do with reality and truth, because this attitude arises solely from the misguided way of life of these humans. Truly, life is neither a struggle nor a massacre, but a joy and a way of progress and development. However, all those who complain about life and its situations, etc., whether it is a lack of health, lack of or inadequate interpersonal relationships, lack of money, etc., they shape their lives themselves, their respective situations, behavior, work or inactivity, because each individual is the forger of his own destiny. So when they suffer, they create their own suffering, their financial debts, their quarrels with other humans, with their partner, a friend, acquaintance, or other fellow human beings. And if they are ill, then it is also their own attitude and behavior, how they approach their illness, just suffering, grouchy, snivelling, self-pitying or brave, patient, good sense of healing and progress, etc. It is a fact that the idlers in life, as well as many pensioners living in retirement, but also a large number of early retirees, make the escape from life the central task of their life and their conscious, psychological and physical, as well as health decay. The whole thing is indeed a peculiar and cowardly self-centeredness, in that a fixation on one's own suffering, on unpleasant situations and circumstances of life, is taking place, and any initiative for meaningful employment is destroyed from the ground up. And in this respect age is not important, nor is the sex of humans, because the only thing that is fundamental is the whole attitude towards life and its duties, which says, "He who rests, rusts." But this is exactly what happens to people who are idle in life, as well as to many early retirees and retired people of both sexes. When they sink into idleness without any initiative, languish miserably and give themselves over to all kinds of suffering and the dwindling courage to face life. In this way, cowardly surfeit of life, cowardly snivelling and, in the end, cowardly suicide is created, in order to escape through cowardice from all those things which are not dealt with in their own lack of initiative and irresponsibility. This is the hard but true truth, even if it is denied by those affected as well as by antagonistic know-it-alls, critics, truth deniers and effeminate false humanists who try to stamp this fact into the ground. Despite this, the fact remains: a rolling stone gathers no moss. And whoever gives himself over to doing nothing during his life as an early pensioner, or when he retires after retirement, falls prey to vices, addictions and all kinds of physical health, conscious and psychological suffering, as well as to grumpiness and surfeit of life, etc. These unworthy values, however, lead to roaring misery and very often end in suicide, which has very high rates among the idlers, the uninitiated non-doers. Life expectancy is constantly increasing, but the sense and responsibility for a healthy activity is diminishing more and more, because more and more people are crying out for early retirement and for constantly further reduction of working hours and part-time work. Many people believe that they have to leave their professional or other active career behind at an early age to indulge in idleness. But many also think that they could manage their lives by alcohol, drug, or medicine addiction. But with these attitudes, their interests, abilities, possibilities, hobbies, as well as their great and life-affirming thoughts and feelings also dwindle away, which inevitably leads to a state of rotting. An identity crisis comes to light, thoughts and feelings of their own uselessness and suicide. In this way, the people concerned suddenly see all the misery and distress that is or has been inflicted on them, but they do not realize that it is their own fault. So they blame it on their fellow men, the state, and the oh-so-evil life and its crass circumstances. For earlier generations, the daily work was useful, which was maintained and carried out until old age. Idleness in life was foreign to them, for without work there was not a healthy, valuable, and progressive existence. When old age came, there was a short pause on the bench with a little less work, before death swung its scepter. Nowadays, however, the aim is to catch one's breath during the highly active phase of life, so that this state of inactivity, whether it be inactive, part-time, or post-work, already covers a third or quarter, sometimes even half, of the lifespan. In and of itself, so many people think, humans should actually be happy and content in this way. But this is not the case and cannot be the case either, because doing nothing brings suffering and damage of all kinds. It is true that today, at least in the industrialized countries, a large proportion of old age pensioners are financially well off, as are many others who are still in pre-retirement age and have no or only minor health problems. But suddenly, the identity crisis is there, because they are struck by self-generated inactivity and are doing nothing or no longer doing anything sensible in life. The inactivity suddenly tears at their nerves, their attitude and their behavior, and instead of the great freedom of inactivity, there is now the threat of desperate emptiness and thoughts and feelings of uselessness. So all those who have a plan and think that they can rest in life, or at retirement age, and be happy and cheerful, fall into grumpiness and an identity crisis. With inactivity, be it woman or man, young or old, humans lose control over themselves, and this is because they become overwhelmed and unrelated with their existence of inactivity. Interpersonal relationships crumble and eventually disappear to give way to indifference and coldness towards the environment and fellow human beings. With inactivity, during life at or before retirement age, the whole status of life is lost, as well as the structured daily routine, which ultimately ends with the collapse of the social network of relationships. The human being is lost in himself, appears useless and worthless, and puts an end to his life by force. The connection is that thoughts and feelings burden the psyche and the consciousness in such a way that humans are no longer needed, so that they feel superfluous, alone and helpless and useless with regard to their activities. Many people of this kind, whether woman, men, young or old, are not even able to provide for themselves in an appropriate and humane manner, or even to prepare a meal themselves, or to do their own laundry, let alone to do anything useful and reasonable with their free time. Countless idlers, work-shy people, early retirees and pensioners are sitting in front of the television for only half a day or a whole day and are consuming all the nonsense that is flickered out to them as TV fare. But in doing so, they encourage their imaginary uselessness all the more, which makes them fall prey to all kinds of addictions and vices, from which they are no longer able to free themselves. Be it alcohol, drugs, medication, amusements, arguments, hatred, jealousy, self-pity, or whatever else. Identity becomes fragile and creates great insecurity, with the self-esteem falling more and more, which, moreover, is based only on what has been done and what has not been done. Idleness. Idleness and retirement are repulsive words for any sensible and always efficient human being who devotes himself to useful work or any other valuable activity, be it a man or woman, young or old. If humans do not keep themselves efficient through useful activities that keep them busy in a reasonable way, this means that they dig their grave and descend into it while they are still alive. The truth is that humans feel that their identity is determined and confirmed by their work or other valuable activities and the resulting reward and value. But if they only cultivate idleness or simply the retired life as retirement, then they lose their identity. A human being who lives his life as idler and idler, or a human being who is discarded from his meritocratic life by early retirement or age-related retirement, inevitably and unintentionally lapses into an identity crisis if he does not, on his own initiative, associate himself with some valuable work or activity that constantly keeps his self-esteem high and does not let it fall. Many humans, woman, man, young and old, find it difficult to deal with work and also with responsibility in terms of their own physicality and with suffering, illness and loss, etc., whereby the male sex is clearly more affected in this respect than the female. The male sex is mainly oriented towards power and strength and sexual potency, but these are increasingly being called into question the less useful the work is, and the less useful the work is. which also has a very negative effect on physical exercise, especially when alcohol and drugs are needed or when there is an addiction to medication. And if work, the mental block or consciousness, thoughts, feelings and psyche as well as physical training are neglected, then this also leads to retirement age, when retirement is imminent, and the evil of neglecting work and physical and mental training takes its toll. Many things do not leave their mark on humans and continue into old age, especially because many people suppress the importance of life and thus create hidden fears that persist throughout their lives. Thus, emotions as well as thoughts and feelings, love, affection, and friendships, etc., are neglected, suppressed, and repressed, which is why it is not possible to live out all these values. When the humans, man, woman, young or old, fail to question their role in life, sooner or later they are in danger of actually being thrown off the track of life. In this way, humans turn themselves into human bulky waste, so to speak, because they give themselves all around as useless and stand in the way of all those who make a conscious, honest, and serious effort to fulfill their duties in life. In this way, they hinder the development of all those who fulfill life in a good way and are consciously devoted to progress and evolution, and these cannot do anything against the human bulky waste that cannot be taught and is not willing to live the life of righteousness, but only laments, suffers, and does not seek improvement. So the only thing they can do is to do their human duty in such a way that they care for the unteachable, nurture them, and do everything possible to keep them alive, and somehow guarantee them a life that relieves their self-created suffering, and so that they can finally die a dignified death. The idleness, the inactivity of many men and women, young and old, often leads, in addition to the aforementioned evils, also to the breaking up of existing and new marital relationships, and to divorce, because one partner can no longer bear the inactivity and clumsiness of the other, and wants to go his own way again in order to be able to live truly and truly. So it is necessary that man and woman also learn manual skills in work and other activities in order to be able to support and assist the other partner. It is also necessary to learn how to establish social relationships of one's own and others, and to develop mental, emotional, and psychological skills. In a connecting relationship, no matter how it is formed, it is necessary for the partners to be responsive to each other and to be willing to pay for the infrastructure in their area of responsibility, or for the organizational and real care and benefits of the existing connection. The older the humans become, the more offended and hurt many react to aging and to old age itself, and this in turn is a strong impulse for massive addictions and vices, especially alcohol and drugs as well as medication that numbs the consciousness. This in turn leads to mental and emotional impoverishment and social isolation, which in many cases ultimately results in suicide, both in the male and female sex, although the increased suicidal tendency is more prevalent in the male world, especially with increasing age and very much after retirement. And indeed, the number of suicides is very much on the rise nowadays, because the longer the more humans find no more meaning in life and become tired of it. Truly, humans are becoming more and more impoverished in terms of a conscious and responsible evolution. Consequently, they are becoming false humanistic and unable to live, and are simply seeking a false, hoped-for salvation in suicide. And the more uncontrolled the world population increases, the more impersonal it becomes. People become stranger and more indifferent towards each other. The loneliness of the individual is thus pre-programmed, as well as the vices of idleness, conscious and parasitic inactivity, and work shyness, but also the abandonment of all work and activity, as well as mental and physical training during the pre-retirement life and after retirement. The suicide of humans is scandalously trivialized and even encouraged by the state by allowing irresponsible murderers to use their craft of indirect suicide assistance. Suicide has become, in general terms, a symptom of a very widespread crisis of meaning, of a falsely conceived senselessness of life, both among young people and among pensioners, but especially among the latter. As has already been mentioned, alcoholism, drug abuse, and drug addiction also play an important role, but these are usually hushed up or not taken into account at all, even though they are alarming signs of a weakened mental state. Both young and old are at risk of addiction, although the number of pensioners is rising steadily. The young addicts of alcohol, drugs and medicines, as well as the work-shy and idle people in life rot and decay on the streets, become tramps, criminals, sick with HIV, etc., and end up as corpses in the gutter, or they are sent to institutions, etc., only to fall back into their addiction and vice once they are released. This, while the retired and old people are put into nursing homes and old people's homes and are treated with psychotropic drugs to keep them quiet so that they are not put to much work. But this does not help in any way. Quite the contrary, because people, young and old, who are put into institutions and homes and have no job, no work, and no other valuable activity, rot hopelessly, fall into disrepair and become ill. The young and old people affected in this way are deprived of their lives and their duties, and it is precisely this which, as the main factor, leads to serious depression, but also to rebellion against the state system, the social order, and against the laws, etc. This is not surprising. However, because the whole of this way of dealing with the idle, work-shy, idle, addicted, and dissolute, as well as with those who retire early and those who are retired as a result of old age, means that there is no orientation towards the future. There are exceptions among the retired, but these exceptions are constantly diminishing, for the elderly are increasingly becoming mere spectators of real life outside their sphere of influence. The same applies to the unemployed, those addicted to alcohol, drugs, and medicines, those who are shy of work, idle and idle. In truth, no one is honestly waiting for them, because no one expects anything valuable from them if they are socially simply written off and dead. Idlers, and work-shy people, addicts and vicious people are put on the sidelines, rot in the gutter. But early retirees and pensioners are just as often sidelined and excluded from any responsibility in terms of social participation, with the result that an existential void is created just as much as with the addicts, the vicious, the work-shy, the idle, and the idle. All these humans, young and old, are not sufficiently or not at all placed in the middle of society and not in the public space where they could participate responsibly. Social participation is completely denied to them, even though humans is a social being, and only true through their positive and responsible actions in the community. Truly, as responsible humans, we cannot afford all these young and old people to be left on the sidelines just because they have fallen outside the social fabric or have reached retirement age. So it is necessary to develop a culture in which all these humans are involved and can live their lives in a social way. The young freaks must not simply be discarded, just as those who have reached retirement age must not simply withdraw or be retired themselves, but must still be involved in everything possible in terms of work and other valuable activities, including social, societal, and also political activities. The freaks of all kinds must be guided and taught by state efforts to achieve rights and a positive way of life, that their addictions, vices, aversion to work, inactivity and idleness will lead them to a just life of work and social life, while the young and old of retirement age must be protected from any discrimination against them for being unfit for social, societal, and political activities. Any exclusion of humans from social life and from society is criminal and in no way fit for the future. All prosperity of mankind depends on creativity and the ability to innovate or change, on planned and controlled change and innovation in the social system, through new ideas, techniques and political progress, etc. for the freaky ones and the old age pensioners. It is not a matter of taking them into responsibility against their will as a stopgap for any kind of work and activities, etc., but of instructing them about their responsibility and showing them ways and possibilities so that they can occupy themselves with valuable things and not fall prey to depressions, addictions and vices, etc. They must be addressed and treated as co-responsible and acting humans, who can take a position in public life that does justice to them. So it is not enough for freaks such as addicts, vices, work-shy people, sham invalids, idlers and other idle and malingering people to pay simply horrendous pensions and increase the pension of the elderly while they are suspended and excluded from the usual work and activity process. This does not mean that there is necessarily a need to be gainfully employed, but a job or any activity that can keep the consciousness, thoughts, feelings, psyche and body healthy, and also free them from or prevent addictions, vices and depression. And if humans in their young and middle years, or in their pre-retired or old age pensioner life, pursue a work or any other valuable activity, then new liberties are offered to them again and again in various relationships. And if the execution of a work or other valuable activity is done voluntarily and freely, then all constraints disappear and new valuable perspectives open up again and again. In this way, everyday life is no longer characterized by a programmed system and competition, which often reveals a misjudged potential for development in creativity. But this is a new freedom that applies equally to men and women, young humans and old people who are retired. And indeed, it is up to each human being to change his or her life for the better, to give it a new twist by doing a decent job or some other valuable activity, because everyone is the forger of his or her own destiny. Billy Edward Albert Meier, 058 Hours Sim Ya Say Silver Star Center, 20th June 2008.
Wait, the phone. It was Bernadette. She left me proofreading in the den. She did not know I had company, but she sends her love. But now I have a question. You fly at a single and multiple speed of light in your spaceships. And our earthly scientists claim that this is impossible, and that a spaceship can never reach this high speed, because the friction with matter, or with material space and ether prevents this. Yes, it cannot be the electromagnetic radiation by which you protect yourself from the cosmic influences and the so-called cosmic ether in order to reach the speed of light and beyond. Yes, electromagnetic radiation of all kinds has the same speed, so about 300,000 kilometers per second. So it is probably not possible that you can use it to prevent friction. So it must be something else that you can use to prevent any friction with the ether or any matter. Is there something very special that you can name that allows you to go one and multiple times the speed of light? Is that a secret, or are you allowed to say something about it? I have never asked about it before, but I am always being asked questions about it that I cannot answer.
It is not a secret, and when I talk about it, I do not give away anything with which the earthly scientists can start something, because their knowledge and ability is far from being sufficient for them to make use of it at the present time, and thus cause harm. So I can say that we use the photons, that is to say the light particles and time radiation, to shield our space flights from the material and anti-material environment. So, we wrap our space flights in a photon force field and in a time radiation screen and protect them from friction against the material space. The photons do not have any weight, but the mass zero, as it is also the case with respect to the time radiation, because they are both pure energy without any medium of their own, which is why they are neutral against any matter and are repelled by gravity. So we make use of this, namely by enclosing our spaceflight devices in a photon and time radiation screen, so that no friction with the material space can occur, which enables us to reach the speed of light and even to exceed it by a very high multiple, because no resistance by any matter appears. To explain details would be irresponsible, because Earth humans are not yet allowed to possess these, because they maliciously use all special achievements for weapon systems and war purposes, etc., which would also be the case with regard to photon technology. And as far as the ether in world space is concerned, it truly does not exist, because this is a mistaken assumption of the earthly scientists. That what they assume to be ether is indeed pure energy, a radiation, and this does not have its own medium and therefore no mass.
Explained briefly and concisely. Thank you. Time radiation. Could one perhaps also call it tachyon matter, which must also be without medium? Ether thus does not exist, but only radiation, which is pure energy without mass. However, now the question how you can do it, to shield your spaceships against view and make them invisible for eyes and radar, etc. Are you allowed to say something about this? But I think that now finally something becomes clearer to me.
If you shield your flying apparatus against any material friction by a photon shield or photon protection shield,
then it is probably so I assume, that these always light up when you have switched on this photon shield. Is that true?
This corresponds to the actual situation, and the term tachyon matter can be applied in a certain way, but it is a time vibration or time radiation and has nothing to do with matter of any form. And regarding the invisibility of our flying apparatus, we can actually make our spaceflight apparatuses, as well as those we use in planetary airspaces, invisible to any view of any kind, by using special metallic alloys, the basis of which is, among other things, silver, as you know from the metallurgical analyses of the material of our flying apparatuses made in the USA. The materials used in our flying apparatus and spaceflight devices are transformed and superordinate composite materials, the composition and manufacture of which I cannot mention, but I can say that we obtain everything through cold fusion processes, as Marcel Vogel in the USA already discovered through his metallurgical analysis when you gave him the metal samples we received for analysis. So, when a flying apparatus, a spacecraft, a human, or any other object is made invisible, it is by directing light around it. The light waves are not reflected, but flow unbroken and uninhibitedly around the object, so that it becomes invisible to any natural or technical eye of any kind, also radar, etc., and simply allows the background to be seen unchanged.
Quetzal recently said that the internet could collapse worldwide in 2 to 4 years due to information overload if internet technology is not quickly improved and the danger is averted. He said that the whole thing would have to be routed via satellites, and that different frequencies would have to be used for certain things, in such a way that each company would have its own frequency, which would have to be specially selected by the end users. He also talked about using new frequency ranges for this purpose, which are already used by earthly science and technology for other things. Somehow he was talking about terawaves or something.
It's called terahertz waves or terahertz radiation, which is omnipresent in all things in a narrow frequency range between infrared and microwaves, and which is actually known to earthly scientists for some years now and which is also used by them in relation to various things. This radiation emanates from every human being and from every other life form, but also from every object and from every material matter. This radiation can be used very widely for fine technology, electronics and medicine in the form of healing apparatus for a great many diseases and ailments, but also extensively for internet technology and for a great many other things. Unfortunately, it will not be possible to avoid, as is usual with Earth humans, that they will misuse the terahertz rays also for weapons and thus also for military purposes. Terahertz radiation technology is already being developed on a progressive scale and will revolutionize a great many things in many respects of Earth humans' achievements. However, it is almost certain that not everything that can be used in this way will be used for weapons and military purposes. So it will still be a long time before the Earth humans turn to love, peace, and freedom and then in the distant future pacify the Earth.
Unfortunately. And until then, the humans of the Earth will become stranger and stranger to each other, more and more indifferent, more and more brutalized, and will lose more and more of their social and state structure, whereby very many will slowly but surely fall back more and more to the lowest level of a regulated organization. And as I have written many times and have also drawn the attention of the governments of many countries to this, all the world's evils of every kind are rapidly increasing with the uncontrolled growth of overpopulation. The flows of economic refugees from third world countries are slowly but surely growing into flights and migrations, as I predicted decades ago. And although this is now indeed the case, the world's leaders are not doing what is necessary to bring everything under tight control and remedy the situation. The same applies to the rising crime rate in relation to overpopulation and the destruction of the climate. Because all the world leaders are just making big slogans and making promises and proposals they can never fulfill. They are as thick as two short planks and are not able to consider that in the time when they want to remedy an evil, the human overpopulation will increase again by hundreds of millions or even billions. And thus all the problems, evils, and destruction, etc. will again increase in relation to the growing overpopulation, and will destroy everything that has been decided and make everything even worse. Not to mention the fact that they themselves are not able to carry out the measures that have been decided upon, because in their stupidity and stupidness they are uselessly trying, with big words and impracticable decisions, to kill a gigantic dinosaur with a fly swatter.
All your efforts are known to me, which you have been making since 1951 to make the governments and public media of the world aware of all the threatening evils. How they have been multiplying for decades on Earth and among Earth humans, but for your warnings, you have reaped only ingratitude, silence, and ridicule. But that your warnings were turned a deaf ear is now taking its revenge.
Regrettably for all mankind and the planet and its climatic conditions. Unfortunately for the humans on Earth, everything is neglected, including the thoughts and feelings that are of the greatest importance in terms of evolution, as well as knowledge and its essence, wisdom. Humans have long forgotten that they have to create certain conditions for the functioning of their thoughts and feelings, namely their ideas, which come about through certain values, and which, as knowledge, impetus, motivation, determination, skill, encouragement, and comprehensive thoughts, control everything. And that they have to hold on to their thoughts and not simply discard them, that seems to them completely absurd. They are also not able to face real challenges, but rather they are afraid of tasks and questions, as well as of actions and conversations that they do not feel up to. Thus, they do not encourage themselves to leave the old ways of their thoughts and feelings, so that they could learn new things and put them into practice in life. In this way, the people of the Earth also fail to gather knowledge and wisdom of every imaginable kind in order to advance themselves with and in it. So they miss out on everything interesting, wherever it appears, and as a result, They do not perceive inspirations and do not recognize things that belong together. And that the environment also plays an extremely important role in the whole. This is also not taken into account, because the truth is that a good social, psychological, physical, and generally positive environment is very progressive and evolutionary and brings creative thoughts and feelings, while a negative, boring, and meaningless environment kills all progress and the evolution of consciousness. So it is necessary for the people of Earth to surround themselves with interesting, valuable, and varied things as well as socially good people, and also to occupy themselves with them intellectually and emotionally, because only then do the good and positive thoughts and feelings grow and create a valuable purpose in life. This already happens with the first positive thoughts and feelings, because if they are cultivated in a true way, then all fears of any kind lose their threatening nature, as well as all doubts disappear. And this is exactly how attention and readiness are increased, to give full concentration on the present its necessary place. But one question, you once told me, in reply to a question about the fact that some antibiotics are ineffective against some pathogens, it must have been in 1989, that medical research could find new antibiotics by using certain substances from crocodiles. Yes, I noted down what you said then and gave it to Dr. Karodi, who promised to pass the information on to a friend at a university in the USA. Unfortunately, I have not heard anything more about it since then, and Dr. Karodi is also dead in the meantime. I also do not know anymore what can be used by the crocodiles to produce new antibiotics.
It is the crocodile blood, or rather the crocodile proteins from which new antibiotics can be produced. Your notes at that time were actually passed on by Dr. Karodi to his friend in the USA, who arranged for research to be done in this area. I am not sure how this research has progressed in the meantime, but I know from a look into the future that it will be successful.
One more question. At the 387th official contact conversation on the 5th of May 2005, the following was discussed. But one more question. It is constantly being reported that new small moons are being discovered near Jupiter and Saturn. What's that all about? On the 11th of October 1989, I already talked with Quetzal about it. Contact Reports Volume 6, page 48, where I said the following. At the 123rd reported contact, on the 4th of June 1979, 10 years ago, Sim Ya Se and I had a conversation regarding the moons of Jupiter. Here, this was spoken briefly. Just one last question, also because of Jupiter, which has many dozens of moons, but only a few large ones, but more smaller formations, which are actually not true moons and have not yet been discovered, precisely because they are so small. Yes, there are about 100, if I am not mistaken, or even more, and actually they are fragments and other smaller objects captured by Jupiter. Will they also be discovered next, and may I talk about them?
You should keep quiet about this for at least another 20 years. These Jupiter satellites are discovered by earthly astronomers.
As far as the small moons of Jupiter and Saturn are concerned, it must be said that they are not actual moons, but only small objects of a few kilometers in diameter, as you said true with Quetzal. In the case of Jupiter, these small satellites go into a number that moves over 100, while objects that can really be called moons are only a smaller number. The same applies to Saturn, whose actual moons are only 29, while many other objects are more likely to be called fractional satellites, etc.
Now the question whether earthly astronomical science still does not recognize that the rift satellites of Jupiter and Saturn are not actual moons.
This will unfortunately continue to be the case because in terrestrial astronomical science there is not a difference between the moon and the ruptured satellite.
A bit stupid, but probably not to be changed. Yes, in the case of Saturn, in addition to the actual 29 moons, there are now about 30 other objects or rupture satellites that are called moons.
In terms of our understanding, moons and rupture satellites are accompanied by fundamentally different planets. But now, Edward, my friend, it is time for me to get back to work because I still have a lot to do.
Of course. But don't you know anything to report in terms of predictions?
I had not thought about that. But in fact, there is not much worth mentioning that is exceptional, except that the Swiss bank UBS, which does investment business in the USA, is suffering huge losses, as will also be the case for U.S. investment banks, because there is an investment crash that has been going on for some time, but which is not taken into account by the banks. Another unusual situation will arise in the middle of next month, when the International Court of Justice in The Hague will issue an order for the arrest of the criminal president of Sudan, Hassan al-Bashir, for genocide, etc. It will be the first time in the history of the International Court of Justice in The Hague that an arrest warrant will be issued against a person still in power.
Aha, something's finally going to be done about that lout. Yes, he has hired Arab bandit horsemen who are murdering the population in the province of Darfur, and have already murdered hundreds of thousands. Hopefully this presidential mass and people murderer will be brought to justice and removed from circulation. Yes, and what about the investment banks? Their activities could not continue endlessly as they have done. Due to the bad economic and working situation in the USA, which the banks have not wanted to acknowledge for a long time, the homeowners, etc., become insolvent, so that a bank crash is not surprising.
The whole thing has already begun during the last few years, but the greed of the bank managers has prevailed. But now, Edward, it is really time for me. Take care of your health and do not work too hard. You have really done a lot more to the mission than what was originally intended by the original provision. Goodbye, dear friend.
Also, dear friend, and goodbye to you too. Sachlomie.